I'm Rob Kaufman. I identify with he, him, his. I'm here to talk to you today about the Picard maneuver, which is a importing maneuver or importing technique that we've been using here at Scientist to speed up metadata importing. So in Star Trek, the Picard maneuver is a method of moving your ship very small distances at light speed in order to appear as if the ship is in two places at once on the sensor array of an enemy ship. It is also in Star Trek what the cast and crew called what Patrick Stewart would do when he tugged his outfit down all the time because it had a tendency to ride up. And it's in hundreds and hundreds of shots on episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. Him tugging his suit all the time is also called the Picard maneuver. But what the heck does that have to do with Samvera applications? So one of the issues that we often face in our projects is that importing large sets of data frequently needs to be done much more quickly than we would like it to do, or much more quickly than it is currently happening. Delays add up and can make importing much more slow than we would like it to be. Also, any project deadline slippage has a tendency to affect the importing of data because it tends to be later in the project timeline. So the first thing we need to do is check for other speed issues, things like networking, pulling for flowing files from a remote source. Is that source blocking us or slow? Indexing speed. This is especially true of the nested indexer, which can be a big slowdown issue, or file processing. But at some point, it is actually just the process of stuffing the data into Fedora that is causing the speed to be slow. And that's where this technique is helpful. We've specifically developed it and have been using it on applications that are metadata only at the moment. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So what do you do? What we've been doing is we'll create multiple copies of the whole application stack. So a separate Fedora, separate Solr, separate Redis, except for the database the actual Hyrax application talks to. You leave that the same for all of them. If you're connecting to Postgres or MySQL, it can more than handle the load. That way all the permissions templates all get created in the same location, and you don't have to migrate both the database and the Fedora repo. You just can migrate the Fedora repo. Then we make sure that any admin sets or collections used by a given import set that are shared amongst other import sets, not being put in the same repo, are pre-created. So if you have, for example, maybe all of your works are going into a default admin set, but they're creating a few small collections as you go, that's completely fine. But if it's like everything goes into one large collection, both from this import and from other imports you're doing, then that needs to be pre-created. And it needs to be the same in IDs in the Fedora repos across the different Picard maneuver servers. So we might have 4 or 5 servers running. We could do 20 if you needed to. The expandability is horizontal, is very large. Then you do the import work in parallel. So we typically use bulk racks to import work. So we would just have bulk racks running on 4 servers, 5 servers at the same time. In one instance where we did this, there was kind of regular work continuing to happen on production, both deposit and some staff-based importing there, while we were trying to bring in an import set of 2 million records, kind of using this Picard maneuver technique on the side. Then you export the data from a given Fedora. So Fedora has good ability to back up a single Fedora instance and re-import that into another Fedora instance. So you run that exporter. And then before you kind of clean out your Picard maneuver server, you want to get all the IDs from the works to make re-indexing fast. And then you re-index those IDs. So basically, we take a Fedora backup, we import that Fedora backup into the production server, the kind of final resting place of it. And then we do a Solr index of just those items that we moved. So this is what it might look like visually. You can see here that I have Alpha, Bravo, Charlie in production. So I have 3 of these Picard maneuver servers, and I'm pumping data into each one of them separately. I have a combined Rails or Hyrax database down here at the bottom. This little guy indicates that Fedora should be backed by a real database. Please don't use the internal Fedora 4 database storage, use MySQL or Postgres to back it. Solr, a Redis, Sidekick, and Rails. Sidekick and Rails need shared file service between them, and that's what this little guy represents. And so we just have full copies of the thing, and we're stuffing data in. It's literally appearing in multiple places at the same time. The database record parts are all coming into the Rails database, but the actual works themselves, the archival items, are happening in these individual Fedoras. And then when we're ready to take a batch, we will export from this Fedora, copy it into production, export from this Fedora, copy it into production, export from this Fedora, copy it into production, do an index over here of those new records, and off we go. This provides pretty substantial speed up. It's not a true like 1x speed up for every server you use because you do have that export import step at the end, but it can drastically reduce the amount of time it takes to bring in data, especially if you're bringing it in from like an OAI feed or some other remote source. Things we have not tried yet, super large sets. So anything over 1 million records, we typically are taking cuts of about 50K to 100K records at a time, and then importing them and then clearing out those Fedoras and starting them again. Yeah, I know at very large scale, importing into Fedora can be slow. Like the backup still seems to go relatively fast, but the actual import part can really bog down, and it will not let you write additional records during the import. So it's worth noting that if importing takes a whole day, that is a day that the production site cannot take new data. And then the other thing we haven't tried yet, but should work theoretically, is items with attachments. When you do the Fedora backup, it doesn't really have a flag to say, hey, I'm going to keep my attachment, I'm going to copy the attachment separately for Fedora 4. If it did, then that would be like, that would kind of get us around this problem. But it makes a copy of every single item. So if you have large files that you're attaching to each of your records, this technique has some real flaws there, frankly. I'm really interested to look at in Fedora 6 or Postgres Valkyrie based system, like does this technique still have value or does it become kind of untenable in those situations? But for Fedora 4, this is something we have found to be useful. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?